Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
You're listening to another episode of Bad Jew. Right now, there are 7 million podcasts in existence, and you chose this podcast to get your insight. And what kind of insight are we looking for today? We're looking at the intersection between Judaism and business. With us today is Baruch Tuman. Baruch, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Chaz. I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
It's great to have you here. It really is great to have you here. On Bad Jew, you're now familiar enough with the show to know that the right of entry to getting onto the show is the Bad Jew Challenge. You got to tell your life story in 4 minutes. Are you ready?
Ooh, 4 minutes. We're going to do our best. I love talking, so we'll see how we do.
All right. Echad, shtaim, shalosh.
Hi, everyone out there, and hopefully some of this is novel for Chaz. So I grew up on the central coast of California, 1982. So those of you who can do math, you'll be able to make that calculation yourself. And a small little town raised by two Jewish parents who very much wanted to give all of their 4 children on the third in line a knowledge about them being Jewish. So we had lots of Jewish different things happening in our house. We'll probably talk about that inside the podcast itself. So I grew up, though, of like 3,500 people. There were 10 of whom were Jewish in my high school, because all small towns were coming into one. So definitely had a firm Jewish identity, but probably didn't have so much of Jewish knowledge. The closest Reformed temple was about a 4 or 5 minute drive closer to you over there, where originally Chaz, Thousand Oaks, California. And but my parents very much tried to instill Jewish values, and my father and I would sit on our deck out amongst the stars and talk Jewish philosophy when I was growing up. Hop, skip, jump. I then went, I should note that I went to summer camp, Jewish summer camp every single summer since I was pretty much 10 years old, Camp Swig and Camp Newman, along with my siblings. And that really what impacted my Jewish development also. Then went to UC Berkeley, which is really just then had all the people that I went to camp with. We all showed up on the same Hillel chapter over there in Berkeley. And like Chaz, I became very active in Hillel. And at one point in time, between my second and third year of university, I then started asking questions because of a trip that I took with a group of rabbis actually from UCLA that would allow me to be exposed to asking questions about Judaism. And it's the first time I ever met like an Orthodox rabbi. And that trip led me to some other questions that I ended up that summer actually making a lot of inquiries, and ended up taking off 3 semesters from Berkeley, spent some time learning about Judaism on the East Coast, came back, finished my degree at Berkeley, and then went to Israel 1 year at a time, pushing off grad school. And what 1 year actually became 9. And that was kind of my way of making up for Jewish time, what I felt was lost Jewish time to figure out what does Judaism have to say for itself. The whole entire time that I was studying, I had in mind that probably just like I felt I was tapped on the shoulder to learn more about my Judaism, kind of wanted to give that back. So even when I was dating my beautiful wife, Judith, 3 years into my time of learning in Israel, we were dating. I was saying that we're probably going to, I would like to have the plans to go back to Israel and be a teacher of some sorts. And she was very much behind that. She was raised as an army brat, so she could be very, wherever we ended up. So we ended up living in Israel for 6.5 years after we got married. And we had 2 of our children there. We have 4 children currently. And we ended up coming back and working in Chicago, first on college campus work, and then transitioning over to actually with business professionals, coming to their offices, coming to their homes, teaching in individual and in group settings about Judaism. That would allow me then to get a awareness of people's lives, more about their personal lives and also in their professional lives, till eventually the idea of me opening up my own coaching practice to become a business coach for business professionals. And that's what I do currently. My wife also works for an organization called Partners in Torah. She's actually been doing that for 13 years. Great for, I think, your audience to just know about them, because it's where people can actually sign up to have their own personal mentor free of charge of any subject that they want to learn in Judaism. So definitely different things going on inside this Tuman home, different opportunities to get people connected and more aware of their Judaism. And I think I'll end with 10 seconds to go. How do we do, Chaz?
Hey, you did pretty great. And I got to say, it sounds like the Tuman household is a power couple. I think that's really, really amazing. For a second, I thought you were telling my life story just because we have those amazing parallels in our journey there. It's really, really amazing. And wow, what a wonderful journey you've gone on. That's pretty incredible. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It really has been a journey. Like I know that
Right.
you suggested you've been on your own journey as well.
Absolutely. Now here's the thing. When a lot of people go to rabbinical school, I imagine not a lot of them say that they're going to become a business coach one day.
It probably is true that's not the aspiration at the beginning. That's true.
How did that transition come to be?
That's a very good question. A part of that transition actually became because of COVID. A part of my, if you can imagine, when you're in, Chaz, we haven't talked so much about your sales funnel, but the way in which that I would find people, business professionals, to be able to study Judaism, right? So can you imagine that, what kind of sell is that? So will you meet with me so we can discuss about Jewish subjects that you probably have either, a positivity, but it's not something you want to build more into, or something that you didn't like something from your bar bat mitzvah. Can we talk more about that? My main training had been in get people on the phone and try to get off the phone as quickly as possible and have them come and meet you at Starbucks so they could see your warm smile and get to hear a little bit about your life. And they'd be like, oh, wait, you grew up without so much of a Jewish background and now you look the way you did. You do. So that was really my sell. How does that answer your question? When COVID hit, now it's how do I keep meeting people? So I actually had a colleague of mine who also started with the college campus route, but then turned himself into a coach for executives. And when I heard a webinar during COVID about the transition he had made, I kind of I got to know more about that. And I actually hired him to be my personal coach, originally just to try to figure out how was I now going to bridge the gap. And that journey for about 6 months of working here with him, as I kept learning more and more about what he does professionally, kind of also allowed, and he was definitely intimating and definitely encouraging that you could really wear two hats, that you could continue to be teaching on your end, but you could also brand yourself with something that has a much bigger and larger brand, right? About, I think the coaching world is at something around 7 billion, all right, per year in revenue. And you could use that brand to say, listen, I will help you to develop, right, what it is that you're trying to develop, either in your personal life, definitely start off in the life coaching realm, and now transition over after gaining the skills of actually helping people in business to increase their revenue and their profits.
Fantastic. So I'll admit, I have a personal stake in this as well here, in the sense that, I am Jewish and I own a business. So I've become now a Jewish business owner. And now that Judaism has become a bigger part of my identity, it was an entrepreneur first, then later on, Judaism really became revolutionized in my life. So there have been these different steps that have, led to this point. And I wonder if I had experienced the Jewish revolution first before the business side, if I had been thinking in this way. But within my Bad Jew WhatsApp community, we were asking a lot of different questions and kind of spitballing potential episode ideas. And my submission was, how do you do business Jewishly? And who better than a business coach who happens to also be a rabbi? So Rabbi Tuman, how do you do business Jewishly?
Love it. So it's obviously a broad question. And Chaz, we got to talk a little bit beforehand as far as how to try to break it down. So I am going to let you continue to lead, but I definitely have a few areas. But I think that the main thrust of where we could talk about something that is unique, wouldn't necessarily it's uniquely Jewish, but I think it's definitely something to be mindful of as far as what Judaism is trying to convey and what we're trying to achieve. And I'll use it by way of an analogy. On my first journey trips on the East Coast, somebody sat me down and asked, at that time it was Brandon Tuman, right? And it still is Brandon Tuman, but he said, Brandon, what do you think is the number one character trait that people admire in other people? And I was like, I have no idea. First of all, character traits. I don't think I have even thought about the word character trait, those two words. But when he said it, it's something that's resonated with me. And this has probably been about 22 years since this conversation. He says, we admire most. Doesn't mean that we necessarily want to achieve it ourselves. It's a hard process. But that character trait is consistency. That guy that you see, or that gal that is up, they're running at 5:30 in the morning. If you happen to be up also and you see them running, rain, snow, if you're not from California, so more rain, right? And you see them day in, day out do the same thing consistently. That's something to admire. And in Judaism, one of the main, I would say the main character traits that we're trying to look for is trying to build a life of consistency that is not two-faced. It's one in which our values, the ones that we project outward, are the same ones that we're conveying inside. Not saying that happens naturally. That's a work. Or I believe some of the major traits that have helped me personally, and what I've seen also, the success, doesn't mean they're making tons of money, but the successful people in business are the sought after ones who are consistent in their business affairs, and people know them and saying, I do business with that person because of his consistency.
Fantastic. So I think that consistency is absolutely key. That's what helps me determine the kind of team members I want to work with when I'm conducting my business. And I'm not even thinking about that from the Jewish perspective. I'm just thinking about that from a business perspective. That consistency is what my clients are paying me for. And if I fail to provide it, then the business can't operate. It's just that simple.
Correct.
But where in the Torah does it talk about consistency then?
Good. So that's a very good question as well. So consistency is rooted in the fact of what we're ultimately trying to accomplish in it from the Torah lens. And I think there's many, many ways in which we could try to skin the cat as far as what if you could try to encapsulate all of Torah in one sentence, which we definitely have our sages who have attempted such a feet before.
Right.
But a line that I like using and one that resonates with me most is from Eliyahu Kramer, known as the genius of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon. He says that a person was placed in this world to work on his bad character. Okay, so where do you begin with that? Like where is the Torah outlining that?
I mean, I have ideas. We have our animalistic instincts, right? We have these parts in us that instinctually say react this way, but it sounds like, one more time, what's the name of this figure again?
His name is the Vilna Gaon, the genius of Vilna.
Okay, the genius of Vilna wants us to overcome the natural instincts of being a human. So
good. There's so many philosophical points that we can and we should touch upon, but with time.
Right.
But the in a nutshell, so because there's nothing outside of God inside of the concept of traditional Judaism, right, is that God is also the one who gave us our bad character traits. So if those are inherently built in, not just, hey, God shows up in the scene saying, I'll help you with those, meaning I built those into you, and now I'm asking you to actually perfect yourself by working on those. So like Chaz, who knows a little bit too much over here, right? The idea that you have your natural draws, the things that you like to do, that your biology tells you to do, the things that are inherently convenient. And then there is the realm of what should I do? What's the right thing to do? And where Judaism is saying that the Torah is trying to outline for you and help you to outline what are the correct, what are the right things, what are the moral things to do, versus our lower selves that are constantly telling it, come on, just take the easy way out. So that synthesis of trying to bridge that gap, that's hard. That's the difficulty, that's a challenge, and that is the consistency that we're trying to bridge. And really what Eliyahu Kramer, the Vilna Gaon, I believe is what he's asking and telling us that's the job of every single Jewish person.
Fascinating. Okay, so consistency is key, and without it, we kind of fall into this convenient reactionary state that leaves us to be unproductive as people.
So again, just defining terms, productivity, depending on what the productivity is. But as far as productivity from a moral sense, absolutely. And when we go back to the idea of consistency, in order for a person to be actually achieve those heights of, wait a minute, does that mean that I have to be consistent that like, okay, I won't get angry in front of a client, but now am I going to get home angry with my spouse or with my kids?
Right.
But to have that consistency doesn't mean that you're going to always be good at it. You're lousy until you do it right. 80 years worth of time is that when I build that though, a person can see that I'm trying to build that consistency, as opposed to what you were describing, Chaz, is a person just naturally just kind of bleeding into wherever I float will be my, whatever trend is going to really dictate how I live my life.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, so
is that a Jewish philosophy, at least in one nutshell, for our podcast today?
I think that's a great note on consistency, and that certainly could open up a whole can of worms philosophically. But from the business perspective, I think that it's, again, like I said at the beginning, it's an essential part of any business. I think that's what people are paying for ultimately. I have this terrible tendency, right, of right in my neighborhood where I live in West LA. There's an El Pollo Loco right across the street, and right across the street from the El Pollo Loco is just a Mexican food truck. So here you have a local business competing against a big chain. And now, by the way, I eat kosher style, so neither of these two places are actually kosher. I separate my meat from my dairy, and I am only eating, the meat and, veggies and inside there, and hoping that they make it correctly. I know it's not halakhically correct or anything, but when it comes to my decision, I'm always left with this dilemma, and I always end up going for El Pollo Loco. And the reason why is
that's the smaller one or the bigger one?
That's the big one. El Pollo Loco is like a major chain out here in the West Coast. And the reason why is because they're consistent. You can always get a consistent quality. You know what you're going to get. But when you go to the food truck, you don't exactly know what you're going to get. You know that you're supporting a local business, but it almost feels like you're doing them a favor. And I don't want to ever leave any food truck. I just, no one acquires business out of a favor. You don't want to do that. You're always trying to get a consistent result from the vendor you're buying from. So I can see the value in that for sure.
And Chaz, I think that you're already looking from a viewpoint where when a person has sometimes the luxury or who's already raised inside of a system where that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
I think one of the things just to point out over here is that Judaism is always pushing us in the areas that are not always convenient to do what's right.
Right.
Just one example that I wrote down before we were sitting over here, just as an example, just to tie it in, is that, Judaism, like you'd mentioned, it has some very keen laws about how to eat. So if I wanted to be very critical about it and say, great, I don't want to touch the things that I shouldn't be touching, right? I want to get involved in it. So you know what? Convenient. I'll just stop eating.
Right.
The problem is that built into the system again, right, by design, is that we're always going to be tested in areas that we have to step into. Business is one of these areas that also, great, you have two different, a corporation, right? All the things that we've heard, different areas, is that if a person could skim, they're going to make more on their bottom line. But to have that test, right, to come through maybe more like what you and I do is, to try to tell somebody, I'm going to capitalize on this, I'm going to get this done, and then not deliver. Many people try to do it because that's what makes the sale.
Right.
But long-term wise, which I think that you and I have probably already seen with our businesses, that will not, at the end of the day, ride out the storm when people come to referring you and when it comes to people actually wanting to long-term do business with you. So it definitely behooves a person to try to make this a part of who they are.
That's amazing. I think that's just amazing. But speaking of drawing lessons from the Torah to embetter your life, whether it's convenient or not convenient, whether it's, out of the way or not, what's another instance where you've been able to apply a lesson from the Torah to your business coaching?
It comes up all the time. And I think it was consistency, but I will just share it's not business specific, but at the same time, as we probably already shared, it's the way the person conducts business is the same way they're going to connect their personal lives with their spouses, with their kids, with their interpersonal, and interpersonal also is inside of business. So I find it's one and the same. So even though it might be an example from outside of business specific, it's right there. So there's one, I once ran into a situation where I think it was a security issue. The Pittsburgh synagogue shooting had just happened. And there was a synagogue that I was attending here who I think the week or so after, where everything now became security and, the highlight of security on synagogues. There was one synagogue in Chicago that they did not actually have like any people could when the doors were open, you could just walk in. So I went to one of my mentors and I said, Rabbi, I don't know if my wife would be so happy with me going to that synagogue, knowing about their lack of security procedures. And so my rabbi said to me, he says, Baruch, you should know it's a general rule. You should probably not be places where if your wife were to know you're there, she wouldn't be happy with you being there.
Okay.
And I use that as an analogy for when a client of mine was telling me about personal interactions that he was having with people that was not his significant other. And he said, wow, that is a novel standard that I've never been, I've never been exposed to, that really will allow me that, you know what, there are certain conversations and different things that I'm having. Maybe it's even a business that is like stepping over a boundary, but I never know sometimes, right? Because you're in business, you're talking to the person, you're giving them compliments. But Baruch, I think you revolutionized it. I don't know if it's going to be easy, but it's actually making me think, wait a minute. If my significant other would not appreciate me having the conversation, or at least not in this manner, so that's probably a good, a line in the sand, not to cross over.
So you're saying for general business standards or business practices that you apply, thinking about, like, basically in my case, right, my amazing girlfriend's name is Kelly, right? If I was participating in a practice, it's said by the Torah, WWKD, what would Kelly do? Or, what would your wife do? What's your wife's name, Baruch?
Judith.
So it's for you, it's what WWJD. Okay, got it. Okay.
Well, which again, that is just an analogy that sounds more of like life coaching, but at the same time, obviously, with everything going on that we've had with the Me Too movement, it's definitely a question, especially with the people that have staff, like where do you create a line to make sure that you are keeping things that are professional versus somehow or another now making them personal, which we see, article after article that's happening as far as this CEO and that CEO having to, renege their position because of things that interpersonally got involved in their professional life.
Run the business and manage the business the way that your partner would be proud of.
There you go. And more importantly, also that you would be proud of because it's consistent with your internal core values.
Great callback.
No, you're right. And I'm just adding. So that,
yeah.
Right.
No, it's great. It's really great. Okay. So what does the Torah say about managing money? Because with no money, there is no business. Otherwise, it's just an idea. Good. So what does the Torah say about that?
Let's define terms or make it a more narrow, because it says a lot of things about money and how to manage people's money and how our perception of money. But what specifically would be helpful to you in the studio audience? Chaz?
Yeah, no, it's great, and I realize I'm basically getting free coaching from you right now. I'm getting the perfect blend of Torah study to business coaching here. Specifically, what does it say about paying staff members? I mean, obviously you got to do it, but is there a specific process the Torah highlights when it comes to taking care of your staff, when it comes to the resources you put into your company, the resources you put into projects, how you bill your clients, things like that? Good.
So the staff member one, which is probably something that Chaz usually has researched, and one of the novel things that I heard right away when I was venturing into learning more about Judaism, is when you have a hired worker, so without having any set terms, Judaism says that you have to pay him by the time the day is up, which I think is a little bit novel, especially in our world where we're kind of always used to like paying later or sometimes, depending on what the pay structure is. But if nothing else is set up, it definitely talks about the humanity of it, that a person just worked for you. So what is that time frame? Do I get when I give a person a wedding card, that's up to a full year, right? No, that guy just did that, and he's probably going to go home and might need that money to eat, so that he has to pay it right then. When it comes to already set terms, so that makes it a little bit easier. It makes it easier in the fact that the terms are set as far as what you're owed. So you're owed to be able to say to the person that you're going to be paid on time. If you can't pay them on time, which I feel is more of what happens, I don't think they're okay. If a person is out there and he doesn't want to pay, and is a charlatan, fine. So that's one. But people that want to do the right thing, but let's say that they're just short on payroll. So my understanding, just on one foot without researching this topic, would be to be upfront, because at the end of the day, you don't have money, right, to give them. So what are you going to do? But to be letting them be apprised of the situation, which I know one of my clients also was saying to me recently about as far as making payments. And I said, this is the greatest relationship, because as opposed to me thinking that the check is coming, you're letting me know. So then we can now I'm on the driver's seat again of whether or not I get to continue coaching or we take a hiatus or whatever it is. But you're really giving license to the people that are working for you to then make their choices of, well, do I need to stay or do I need to now find a side gig to make sure that I can pay for my bills? So I think it's, again, this idea of the authenticity of being able to step up and say, what is the reality versus trying to put on a facade of saying, yes, keep working for me and don't worry, the check's in the mail, is highly problematic.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You got to be truthful and front facing with your staff when it comes to their payments, because in a major way, the people that are working under you are relying on you to impact their livelihoods. They themselves have families to feed. They themselves are, they're not working for you for fun. They're not working for you out of a favor. Yeah. They need to support their families.
And Chaz, I'll just add one other thing, that again, this idea of the intersection of the challenge is that I think that many times I can think of kid scenarios that are like this also, that there's like a prize coming, but they did something wrong. The idea of a person, right, doing something that let's say the owner did not appreciate, that has to be a separate category of conversation, not connected to their pay. Because unless their compensation packages are based on their KPIs, you're not allowed to be like, well, listen, we're short on payroll, and that guy's been doing a stinky job. And by the way, I don't like him that much. Whoa, two separate categories, emotionally might be very intertwined, but having to keep those delineated when a person is doing their due diligence of, I am their payee, right? I have to make sure that I'm doing their payment. How to deal with the idea of making sure their KPIs are happening, separate category. How do I incentivize? How do I step it up? Or do I fire them? Great, but these cannot be jointly conversations as far as making sure that payment, when I've already agreed to them to pay them for the job, assuming that they've been showing up.
Fascinating. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And this is, by the way, why I find business, we already know Judaism is a very spiritual entity in itself, but business itself, I always have found to be very spiritual, because I think that you see people putting themselves out there in this very risky way. They're challenging themselves to rise to the occasion and to take the initiative to be able to support themselves in this miraculous way. They found a solution to a problem. So now they got to convince people that their problems are big enough for them to pay for, right? Or maybe my sales coach would be screaming at me right now if you heard me say that. So actually, it's not convincing. It's more so helping them understand why they need it more, right? And then following that, it's the act of, like you said, doing it consistently and making yourself a resource for anyone that needs that same kind of help. You're there to solve that problem, and that makes the world a better place. At least in theory, on paper, that's what business is supposed to be.
Wait, but Chaz, I'm confused. You connected that to, you feel that that's spiritual. Now I want you to take it home for us. How do you find that is inherently spiritual?
Because you're committing yourself to solving this one particular problem for people. Ideally, businesses are built off of solving problems.
Nice. And you're saying that becomes the mechanism of you being able to assist other people.
That's right.
Amazing.
That's right.
I like that.
Yeah. I think that, with my company, we're a marketing agency at this podcast production, right? A podcast never saved anyone's life, right? Having an Instagram account never saved anyone's life. It never put food on the table unless you were an influencer, right? But when you're able to combine and create, this comprehensive marketing plan, podcast production, social media management, SEO and blog content, web design, graphic design, you name it. We do all kinds of stuff, pay-per-click ads, general ad campaigns, inbound, outbound marketing. I could throw a lot of terms out there, right? What we're doing is we're helping businesses that had a tough time getting seen, get seen. We're getting businesses to that place where they have the ability to reach new people that can eventually acquire their business to buy their products, to buy their services, which inevitably helps other businesses and their business owners put food on the table for their family.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that you tied that in, because I felt when you're cutting yourself short of the idea of no, that you could be actually supplying the food that's on people's tables. And that's why one of the mentors that I had as far as my business coaching training, they said that from the very beginning. For a person who's so tied down and like trying to work the hours and trying to make things work, but they don't have any productivity as far as sales, they have no productivity as far as where they can find lead generation, all these type of things that, like, again, my father, who was originally in chiropractic, he says, Brandon, I went to school to be a chiropractor. They did not teach me anything about how to run a chiropractic business.
Right.
So somebody like Chaz walks in, right? And I try to do the same thing for my clients, come in and say, listen, you're good at what you do. Now let's actually make it productive so that you don't have to be a guy who's servicing and trying to run the business all by yourself without ever having any business training.
That's
so you
right.
could, and that's really be saving somebody's, if not saving their life, you're saving the fact that they get to put food on the table, and they actually probably have time to then start actually envisioning what it is that they want to do outside of their maddening 60 to 80 hour life as a business owner.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And we're coming to a close on this interview. So I wanted to ask you, Baruch, if there's anything that you want people to take away from the Torah to help them with their businesses, what do you want them to know?
Ooh, with their businesses specifically. So I might actually have to let you have me two stories, if you would, because one is specific on a personal note with Judaism. But on the business note is that I think that it's very important as a plug, business-wise, that we all look for mentorship. It's a very empowering thing, whether that is like you said, you have a sales trainer, whatever type of mentorship. I think it behooves a person that, especially when it comes to their business and business practices, that person is a person who has the character trait of consistency. Because when inevitably the people we hang out with, that's where we glean and that we model after. So if a person is that already that person in their business with their personal lives, etc., the more consistent they have, it's going to rub off on you, and then you're going to be able to pass that on to your clients and obviously in your personal life as well. So that's the one advocacy I would have as far as finding a person that, if you don't have already, as far as some type of mentorship in whatever business you're in, definitely find somebody that has consistency of value.
Amen.
The second thing, just really quickly, is that because Chaz and I shared on the fact that we both had both on our Jewish journeys. When originally, before I had to keep in my head, I got to go on birthright. Chaz, you also got on a birthright trip? Mm-hmm. So I think I was the second class. We were 1999 was the first one, and I was 2000. It's my freshman year of college. And we went there. So whenever they take you to the Kosel, they take you to the Western Wall. And I had heard that it was the Wailing Wall. So Chaz, I think in an interview, I actually heard you had an experience like that, but maybe in Tzfat. So mine was at the Kotel. So I'm standing at the Kotel knowing this is a Wailing Wall. And again, it's birthright, right? It's exciting, and lack of sleep and caffeine and, sleeping only in between the bus, the seats of the bus. And I sat there and I started bawling. Why? Because I saw other people that were crying, and I had no idea why they were crying at this wall, because I felt no connection. So I burst into tears because I felt like it's a wall. And at that moment, I had a realization. I said, God, which I had a relationship. I hadn't talked to God in my life before. I said, God, if you're listening, we're at the Kotel at the end of the day. This mountain, Judaism, if it's a mountain, I ask you right here to please help me step up this mountain of understanding of this larger picture, which I know very little about. And when I did that reach out call, I can track now various things that happen in the next 2 years of my life, because I think I was open, and I opened myself up to wanting to know more about the aspects of Judaism that I always kind of thought it was cultural and bagels and lox, and not realized what depth it had and what it could do, and really what it's done for my life and my family's life for these last 22 years of my journey. So imploring everyone, if you have this opportunity to find your time to be able to say, hey, I want to know more, and find the opportunities, reach your phone out to a rabbi, shout out to Chaz. If you want to know more, there's plenty of opportunities to be able to figure out what it means to nobody's a bad Jew, to figure out what it is in which to figure out what is this whole Judaism thing is, and can I just know more?
Oh man, couldn't agree more. You're right. There absolutely is no such thing as a bad Jew. That's why the show is called that. It's called that ironically. I also wanted to point out that the biggest takeaway for me from what you were describing was the act of just being open. I think that's just so important. The moment you left yourself open, you elevated, as you said. And so to that, I say Yasher Koach, seriously. Baruch, should people want to get in contact with you, be able to ask you Jewish questions, or simply be involved more in your business, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Sure. Again, they can email me on anyone's, and I think the emails will be at the bottom. But Baruch Tuman at torahhub.org. Happy to have Jewish questions. You want to know more about our organization. And then on the business front, it's my first name only, Baruch at raiseyourbar.live.
Amazing. Baruch, this really has been a great interview. I really had a great time chatting with you about the intersection of business and Judaism. I know that we have only stented the concept. We've only scratched the surface. Let's continue this series at some point. Let's do a part 2 and a part 3 at some point. There's so much for me to learn from this. I'm sure that we'll be able to learn together on this subject. And I really want to say thank you again for being on Bad Jew.
Chaz, thank you very much for the opportunity. And Chaz, I have to say, you're very good at this. So keep it up. And I think you're really helping people to be able to find more access and more opportunities to learn more about themselves in Judaism, which is amazing.
Thank you. Really means the world. Really means the world. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, Chaz.
Shalom.